I'm getting good at remembering to record. Um, share the screen. Okay, you see this? You see the quiz? Yes, Dr. Suri. Okay, first question was the term savage was first used on who? Not everybody at once. Somebody speak.
The Indians?
No.
The Irish.
Yeah, that's really important when we get further and further into dehumanization, because any group could be dehumanized. So the Irish. Um, okay, most of you got parts of question two. What was made the Pequot War unique? And yes, it was a coalition of the British, the Narragansett, and the Mohegans, and that had to be in there. But what was really unique about this war, it was the first war for total annihilation of another group in North America. Okay, and that became the norm. Any questions about that? Okay, giddy multitude. Please define what a giddy multitude is, including the meaning of the term. Some of you got the players in Virginia, but that's not what a giddy multitude is. A giddy multitude is any groups with an S, of lower class, low status people who unite together to try to overthrow the ruling classes. Okay, and you're going to see a series of giddy multitudes all term. You're going to see the Japanese and the Mexicans. You're going to see the Jews and the Italians. You're actually going to see at one point the Irish and the Blacks. And you're going to see in Hawaii for a time the Japanese and Filipinos. So you're going to see giddy just as Caliban keeps reappearing, so do the giddy multitude. Slavery officially did not begin in 1619 in the United States. Blacks were sold as indentured servants, but they weren't slaves yet. And that was one of the things. And the British were the first to colonize North America. What's the answer to that? You're muted, Melissa.
False.
False. It was the Vikings. Any questions? Check your scores to make sure I didn't screw up. But again, giddy multitude is a term that you're going to see again and again. Good morning, Karen. Next, I want to finish up chapter 3. So stop sharing. Justine, you finished? And you, okay. I just went over it, but you'll see the answers later on. Where did chapter 5? Oh, okay. Looking for chapter 5:3. Nope, that's already. Too bad for those of you not in my evolution class, because I'm playing Destiny's Child. I got a new way to walk. I got a new way to talk. You think I'm going to go on the road with Beyonce? I think she really likes me. Anyhow, let me pull up this one. So again, chapter 3 is really important for setting the roots. And I thought I had to pull it up. And here we go. Now, did we finish Bacon's Rebellion in the last class or not? Somebody help the poor old guy here. Okay, where did we stop? We did the Tempest. We did the definition of slavery, right? And we did. And we talked
Yeah.
about the principal wealth of slave was not in their field work, but in their ability to have children. Okay, good. Not good in the good sense of the word, but good in the slide I want. Okay, even before slavery was formalized, you had several things going on. At first, black and whites were lived in the same cabins. Now, don't forget the majority of whites were also brought here involuntarily. And please don't ever think I'm saying that they were treated as poorly as blacks, because they never were. But gradually over the first 40 years, distinctions began to appear. There were harsher treatments for black runaways. Does anybody remember what those treatments were?
Yeah, didn't some like have to serve life sentences, but like when white indentured servants got caught running away, they only served like an extra 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. And in more extreme cases, they would be castrated or have their foot cut off so they couldn't run anymore. Just getting to the right page here. Here we go. Blacks were not allowed to carry arms. At times, white indentured servants were. If there is sexual content, and remember Miranda, blacks would be killed for this, whites would be whipped for it. And again, castration. Now, if you have your books in front of you, page 55 and 56 has two tables. Who has their book with them? Anybody? Okay, Daniel, read me the chart on 55 at the bottom.
It says Sarah Hickman to serve 1 year at John Gibbs. Oh wait, it says something about tobacco.
Yeah, that's how much they paid for them.
Oh, okay. So to serve 1 year at 700 pounds tobacco. John Gibbs to serve 1 year at 650. Nehemiah Covington, age 12 years old, to serve 8 years. Simon Caldron, a boy very lame and 14 years old, to serve 7. William Young, another boy full of the scurvy, to serve 6 years. Edward Southern, a little boy very sick, having 7 years to serve. Michael Pacey, a boy to serve 6 years. And Cain the Negro, very ancient.
Here's where it gets interesting. So Cain the Negro, very ancient. Keep going.
1 Negro girl, about 8 years old. 32 goats, young and old, and then a parcel of hogs.
Okay, so you notice the white indentured servants had last names,
Yeah.
as the blacks either had no name or no last name, and they were lumped up there with the goats and the hogs. And that became very evident. We'll see this in the next shadow. They were property. That's all they were. And it also meant that their status was lower. Now, Bacon's rebellion, some of you got a little bit wrong on this. Who was Bacon? He's an actor married to Carrie Sedgwick. Oh, no, that's Kevin Bacon. You probably don't even know who Kevin Bacon is. Who was he? Was he an indentured servant? Was he
a friend of Governor Berkeley, and I believe he was on the council as well.
Yeah, so he was not low, but he was only a small landowner. Okay, and he wanted to expand his land. And the Governor Berkeley discussed that 6 parts of the population was poor, and the white indentured servants once had hoped to gain land. And initially they were given 50 acres and land was taken away from the Indians. But as the plantations, and what type of plantations were they? What were they growing on these plantations?
Tobacco.
Tobacco. As the plantations got larger, the large landowners wanted more and more land, right? And so laws were passed to keep the white indentured servants longer so they couldn't take the land. And later laws were passed that land could only be inherited. So that pissed off people like Bacon because they could no longer expand their land. So you see that he wasn't a poor guy. He initially was a friend of the governor, but then he was trapped. They weren't going to give up what they had for people like him. That became very important. He was not this hero by any means. Nor is my mouse. Let's try this up. Okay. So Bacon's Rebellion. How did it start off?
Didn't it start off where Bacon wanted more land from Indians in the southern part of his area, but then the governor kind of got concerned about that, so he like changed his forces over to Jamestown, like to expedite him out of there.
Yeah. So his first targets, he had tried earlier to rebel, but his first target were friendly Indians. And they were used as a scapegoat, meaning, oh, they're a threat to us, so let's take their land. Okay, I've done this in many classes, but I feel obligated. Where does the term scapegoat come? What does the term scapegoat mean? We need a
Like to use someone as an excuse for one of your problems.
Okay, for 5 extra points, Mr. Shaw, where does it come from?
Yeah, I don't know that one.
Okay, I have to teach everybody Bible. What was Abraham supposed to do to his son?
He was
Oh, he was supposed to sacrifice his son for God.
And at the last minute,
There
the
was a
angel
goat
went-
caught.
yeah, the angel, thanks, Justine. The angel went to Connecticut, took one of Marissa's goats and put it on the altar, right? What's the Hebrew word for knife? Scape.
Escape.
So scapegoat. What's the name of your goat, Marissa?
I didn't really name the goats.
Because you're going to eat them someday?
No. They eat the grass for us. In
Okay,
places where you can't cut it.
okay.
The only purpose they serve.
So he gathered what became the first giddy multitude. Now remember, blacks couldn't wear arms, so there were poor whites who were free, but were not given land anymore, white indentured servants, and black indentured servants. And this became Bacon's Rebellion, a giddy multitude, meaning a silly group of people put together. And you'll see this term again and again. First, he wiped out hostile and friendly Indian villages, hoping to get their land. But because he was taking their land, the government said he was treasonous. So then they marched on Jamestown. And the governor called them a credible number of the meanest people. And Berkeley fled by ship. The capital was burned. Could you imagine a mob taking over a capital? Oh, yeah.
I wonder when that happened in 2021.
Yeah. So they took over the capital. He regrouped, defeated them. Most surrendered, but 80 blacks and 20 whites were promised safe passage. And they weren't given it. Most of the blacks were hung and the whites were returned to their masters. But so that was the end of that rebellion. But it was one of many, many. Actually, New York City, what became New York City, New Amsterdam, had a Black rebellion in 1609. But as the expansions, plantations expanded, there was more in fear of a united class of poor and Black whites. So they chose to eliminate any possibility of a giddy multitude coalition by turning to African slaves. Justine, what are you eating?
Crackers with butter.
Okay. And look at these statistics. Virginia was only 2% African in 1750. 100 years later, it was 40%. Okay. They stopped importing white indentured servants and more began to import Blacks. And again, they were fair. And the whites that they did have, they gave them jobs that were a little bit above slavery. They made them overseers. What's an overseer on a plantation?
Weren't they in charge of like kind of the day-to-day operations
Yes.
of the fields?
Yeah. And they got to beat the slaves. So they didn't get land, but they were separated as a higher class, slightly higher class. One that couldn't get land, but they weren't at the bottom anymore. So Bacon's rebellion failed, changed the face of what would become America, reduced the number of indentured servants, created a cultural draft. What's manumism mission? It banned freeing any Blacks ever. Okay. That became very important because what's the definition we used of slavery? Lifelong servitude. Landless whites could become overseers. More and more slaves were imported. Now they use the religion that we saw in Massachusetts, that Blacks were not equal to whites. Economic reasons were also, they needed a huge numbers of field workers. European reactions were opposed to the treatment of the indentured servants. Class structure, fear of rebellion. So this united the various groups. Now, remember the Irish codes we saw before? Do we remember those, the first group of savages and the Irish codes? Yes. These were the laws. Blacks denied freedom of assembly. Owners could enter slave quarters at any time. Again, they could not carry arms. They were seen as more easy to control than white indentured servants. Why? They were more identifiable, right? Seizing of slaves in Barbados. They generally were not brought from Africa directly to the colonies. Why? What does seasoning mean?
Like, did they like try to make them like adapt to their society first? Like
Yeah.
learn some things first?
Yes. And they did something else. Africa, as you know, are many, many, many different distinct groups. They tried to mix the language groups so they couldn't communicate as well, thinking that they wouldn't develop their own language. They were wrong. Prohibited the abominable mixture of whites and Blacks. If a white mother, the slave would serve for 20 years. If a Black mother, a slave for life. And in the next chapter, you're going to read, you should have read already about David Walker in the beginning of that chapter. Whites, not only the owners, but all whites could abuse Blacks. Sometimes they were put in the military, but they weren't paid. And it was absolutely prohibited for Blacks to learn to read or write or to be baptized. Okay, so these are all laws before the United States was independent. Many of these laws lasted to the 1970s, de jure, and in some ways they still exist. Then we return to Thomas Jefferson one more time. Owned 267 slaves at his death, including his own children. This is where he agrees with the other man. The value of our lands and slaves taken conjecturally doubles in 20 years. I consider the labor of breeding women as no object. So he felt, and that a child raised every 2 years is of more crop profit than the crop of the best laboring man. So he basically saw the women as cash producers. He also had tremendous fears. There had been slave rebellions, Gabriel Prosser, San Domingo, and Jefferson said he feared that there would be rebellions in the United States. What happened in Haiti in 1804?
Haitian Revolution.
Yeah, and they overthrew the French. Now, by the time Jefferson was writing, over 40% of Virginia was Black. Aha. Break down that sentence, the wolf by the ears. I need somebody to volunteer to go out into the wild and catch a wolf and hold it up by the ears. You're going to be safe as long as you're holding the wolf by the ears?
No.
Yeah, because the wolf can't bite you, right? You're going to have to let it go at some point, right?
By the ears?
Yeah, if you hold it up. Who has a dog
I have a dog.
in the room with you?
Oh no, not my room.
Deshaun, pull it up by its ears.
Nah, I don't got a dog by me, but I do have a dog.
Okay, the dog cannot turn around and bite you. The wolf cannot turn and bite you. But wolves are big animals, they're 150 pounds. So if you let it go, it's going to kill you. So justice is on one scale and self-preservation is on the other. It's hard to justify Jefferson, who sometimes waffled that he never did free slaves, but he also sometimes said slavery was unjust. But he feared greatly if we ended slavery or gave slaves more rights, they would be like the wolf by the ears and destroy the society. He did support supposedly emancipation, but only with deportation. What does that mean?
Would that mean that it was okay for them to be freed, but they couldn't live inside America and had to go to a different country?
Yeah. Abraham Lincoln, for all the good press he gets, that's what he supported too. He also said not immediately because it would destroy the economy. So he was saying 25 years at best. He also felt that slavery was an unhappy influence on the slaves, but also on the masters because it corrupted them. And he was right, but who do you think got hurt most in that deal? The slaves. He's flogged his own slaves. He felt color and intelligence, and they were a libidinous race, and he's totally fearful of rebellion. So going back to what we've already read, and here's some stuff that's not in the chapter, well, it is in the chapter. Has anybody heard of Phyllis Wheatley?
I have.
Who's I?
Karen.
Tell us about her.
I know that she's a writer. That's all I know.
Okay, at the time of the revolution, was black. Jefferson felt that she didn't write her own stuff. because blacks were not capable of writing at that level. They could only write of sexual readiness, but nothing deeper than that. Anybody been to Washington, D.C.? Not on June 6th, January 6th. Nobody's been to Washington, D.C.? I can't believe that. No one in this class has ever been
Been
to.
in DC a couple of times.
Okay. Tell me about the street grid.
I know that Benjamin Banneker had something to do with that.
Yeah, like everything. He designed the street. Whoops. He designed the streets. Is that still on your screen? Are you seeing my PowerPoint on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. He designed the streets. It's impossible to get lost in Washington if you read about Benjamin Banneker, because the street, it's like a circle, a grid. The streets are A, B, C, D, all the way through the end of the alphabet. One syllable, go out. Two syllables, go out further. Three syllables, always in alphabetical order. So according to Jefferson, Banneker couldn't do this, and somebody else had to do it for him. So that was Thomas Jefferson, and that gets us out of chapter 3. Any questions on this chapter before we move on? Okay, again, the highlights of this chapter is the seeds were really sown for what would be coming in the future. And so the next thing I want to look at is treatment of blacks in the South and in the North. And then we're going to look at other groups, starting with the Irish. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, and I have an answer. It was 1957 in 7 games, and the Braves beat the Yankees. Was that your question?
No.
Oh, okay.
So didn't Jefferson come off as like contradictory? Basically.
Yeah, contradiction. Yeah. We talked about this some, and I've kind of changed my attitude. I used to think he was pretty good for somebody of his time, but I don't think so anymore. He beat his slaves. He would say at one point, we're at one with the Native Americans, or we must end slavery. At the same time, he was taking land from the Indians. He was treating his own children as slaves. In paper, a lot of other people were just saying slavery, 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 or kill the Indians. But ultimately, that was his legacy.
Wasn't he also hailed as like a hero to white farmers?
Yeah,
Small white farmers?
yeah. For what reason? He would lend his slaves to them during harvest time. Has anybody been to Monticello, his mansion in Virginia? Okay. It's a very lush place.
So
It's better than 140, the dorm.
so because of his like views, the public knew about it, right? Like the people knew like his thoughts about like that were like, oh yeah, like I support it, but then again, like I have my own slaves and stuff like that.
Well, it's like trying to think of an analogy today. I think you judge a president by his policies. And, we have a president now that says he wants to do immigration reform. Let's see if he does it. And maybe we shouldn't pick on him because it's only been a month, but, I think it's a biggie. Or John Kennedy, who I really don't like and am biased against, was all for civil rights, but never passed one iota of civil rights legislation, and only sent, yesterday was the anniversary of the massacre, the beating up of the people marching across the bridge. And Kennedy only sent federal troops there after his brother convinced him to do it. And it was the guy who's usually portrayed in history as a cracker, Lyndon Johnson, that got all the legislation through. But you try to, nobody, it's not day and night. There's lots of gradations. One of the reasons I'm so anti-Jefferson and pretty anti-Lincoln actually, is I think history gives them a very superficial pass. George Washington, greatest president ever, supposedly, took his teeth from slaves. That just came out. So it's complicated. They were people of their times, but there are other people, and we're going to read about them in the next chapter, that resisted that. Or somebody like Ben Franklin, who I used to be very down on, but found some stuff in the last few years where he changed his views. He used to do all this stuff about inferiority, and he wrote that he regretted his views.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we oversimplify in history, I think is my point. And I'm old, but I wasn't around then, so I don't really know what people thought on the street.
Because I was gonna ask, like, oh, like, how could people like elect someone like that? But then I remember 45, and then all the presidents before, and then president now. So, yeah.
And people didn't elect at that point. The House of Representatives elected. Yeah, but it's not an incident, that accident, other than Obama. We've always had white men, almost always wealthy white men, president. And who's the president now? Biden is only our second Catholic president. Alex, are you eating?
No,
Alex,
I'm not eating.
were you eating?
No.
As long as we're not in the classroom, it's okay with me. Let me get up. So I asked you to read the beginning of chapter 5, which of course I pulled up to have ready, and it is ready. Wow. Has anybody, how many times in a class do I say has anybody? 17, 18?
Enough to make it a drinking game.
That's a good idea. A little early in the morning. What up? Is that me? Yeah, it was me. Okay, how many of you have heard of David Walker? Is anybody?
Nope.
Okay, let's start with David Walker. Again, I went a little bit beyond the book. Has anybody watched on HBO the killing of Fred Hampton, who was a Black Panther leader in the 60s, who the FBI just kind of stormed in and killed? Well, there's some similarities. He was born in 1785 in North Carolina. His mother was freed Black, slave father. So by law, that made him a free man. Okay. But he wasn't entitled to an education. So in his 30s, he moved to the North. At 40, he taught himself to read and write. He wrote for Freedom Journal, the first Black newspaper, in 1827. Now, he was in Boston. Did anybody catch what his trade was in Boston? It was just a blip. He sold used clothes, and he sold them to sailors. So he had a lot of contacts from people around the world. In 1829, he wrote a book that would get him killed eventually, Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World. He talked about how Blacks were reduced to slaves in the North, but also totally degraded in the North. Point that Baldwin made is that the North gets a pass because they didn't have slavery, which is not true. But he said the circumstances in the North were pretty wretched. In the South, people were arrested for owning this book, literally arrested. There was a bounty put on his head by Southerners. He wrote slavery could only be ended through violence. Okay, So he said the whites in this country are the true barbarians. And he was talking about, if you read this, and I know the library does have copies, in the North and in the South. And in 1830, he was found dead and poisoned. Am I recording this? Is it showing that it's recording?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. He was killed. Now, he was killed because he was considered dangerous. Think to the 1960s, Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, so many others that we don't even know. Civil rights leaders in the South. Not new. Now, has anybody heard of William Lloyd Garrison? He was a Quaker, an abolitionist, but initially thought blacks should be separated. And he called Walker's work seditious, meaning going too far. But 2 years later, he did change his mind. Now, he was an incredibly important man who we never talk about in school. Anybody even get a passing reference to him in school? Okay, for me, the keys are many: that he was killed, but that he discussed the North as being as barbarous as the South is really important. My mouse has failed me again and continues to fail me. This one over here. Okay. Okay, blacks in the North. Need my little crib sheet. Anybody do the reading like I asked? How many blacks were living in the North at the beginning of the Civil War? If you don't tell me, I'm going to ask you to name them on the next quiz.
About 225,000.
Yeah, 225,000. Is that a surprise to people? Now you're going to see when we talk later on about the conflicts with the Irish and the blacks, there were 4 million blacks in the South at that time. And one of the things that Northerners raised was, if slavery ends, 4 million blacks are going to join their friends in the North and take away your jobs. There were all kinds of restrictions on them in the South, North. Has anybody heard of de Tocqueville? French guy, traveled around as a journalist writing on the United States. And he wrote, "The theater's gold cannot secure a seat for the servile race," meaning the blacks. "The gates to heaven are not closed against them, but their inferiority is continued to the confines of the other world. When the Negro dies, his bones are cast aside, and the distinction and the conditions prevails even in the equality of death." Litvak, another historian, wrote that the conditions in the North were only north of slavery. The schools were segregated in the North. And this is really important, that they really wanted to, if a colored man wants learning, he cannot come to the doors of our institutions. The lords will rise up and shut the doors. Thus, while the white youths enjoy all the advantages, we are excluded and shut out. Blacks were not allowed to ride on public transportation. 1957, Little Rock. New York City, separate buses. Housing was separate. No Negro need apply, no Irish need apply, no Chinese need apply. This is in the free North. Voting, I talked about how the Congress directly elected the president until 1820s. Whites who didn't own land were now given the right to vote. Blacks were not given the rights to vote. Okay. Then there is the actual violence, riots, attacks, not just in Philadelphia, Cincinnati, and the rationalizations. This is the North, not the South. But see if we have something familiar with what was going on before. Stereotypes. They're like children. They lack intelligence. And then we have science. What is science? What's the difference between natural science and social science?
Natural sciences have to do with, like, I guess, the elements, and the social sciences have to do with, like, people and interactions between people.
Would you say natural science are the facts?
Not necessarily the facts, but like,
He didn't fall for my trick. Good. Marissa, you still awake? Yeah, okay. Anybody remember reading about Dr. Samuel Morton in the chapter? He was a scientist, right? And he did a study. And he said that he measured the cranial capacities of skulls of whites and black and found that the white heads were larger, therefore they were more intelligent. That was science, that was a fact. Historian Gossett, Thomas Gossett, said it would be larger to conclude that he's talked about body shape and criminology. So the same power that has given him, this is from a senator, a black skin with less weight or volume of the brain has given a white skin with greater volume of the brain. So again, things that we see, but bolstered by science. Have I done my rant on the SATs yet this term?
Yeah.
Okay, that's quote science, but it's really about social class background. And then there are these tremendous fears, the ones that in the North as well as the South, even though here we're talking only about 225,000 people, that they were criminals. They always played up crimes done by the black. To be a free black in Ohio or Indiana, you had to pay a bond to guarantee that you would not cause trouble. Interracial marriage was prohibited in all the northern states. And one delegate said, we can't let them marry our daughters. That's, again, Prospero's fears. Now, I'm going to end it here. You have an assignment that is now posted, right? Everybody knows what their assignment is. And we should be able to do the rest of the chapter by on Thursday. I go beyond the chapter, though. I'm going to bring in a lot of other stuff beyond the chapter. So any questions? Want a quiz on Thursday? No. Okay. No quiz. Giselle, I'm going to send you an invite for noon. Okay. And everybody else, notice that Justine's hair is no longer curly. And peace out. Robert, I'll grade your test shortly. But now I'm looking for my mouse. There it is.